Hello, BookTube. Who's up for a tag? What about 2 tags? How about 3 tags? What about 4 tags? All at once! Let me mansplain. A long time ago, Sean the Book Maniac, a great channel, I'll leave a link to his channel down below, came up with a book tag, an all-purpose, totally adaptable book tag called the Page 112 tag. That was adapted from a French literary prize where the judges were given page 112 only of the books under consideration. No title, no author, nothing to go on except their reaction to the quality of that one page. The thought being that once you get past the first few chapters, the first few sections of a book that have been looked over extensively, not only by the author but by editors, you get to the part where the author is just being themselves and can judge them more realistically, which I think a lot of us have the experience of a book being really good at the very beginning and then dropping off. So that makes sense. And Sean thought it'd be a great idea to make an all-purpose book tag that you can always do. You can always do a page 112 tag where you pull books off your shelf, or in my case, sometimes books out of the mail. Go to page 112 and see what you see. See what you find there. So we're going to do that today. But a little while ago, Adrian and Dalton over at Stripcover Lit, another great channel, I will leave their link down below, they created a tag called the Popcorn Opening Paragraphs tag, and they tagged me. And the purpose of that tag is to read out and display some opening paragraphs that have meant a lot to you in books over your reading history. And I'm going to adapt that slightly as a sort of cousin to the page 112 tag, because none of the samples that I'm going to read to you mean anything to me yet. They're all new to me. And because I'm using both those tags and adapting them, then that counts as a BookTube Parasite tag, which is another tag that Sean the Book Maniac came up with, where you sort of siphon off the intellectual property of your fellow booktubers rather than make a video of your own. But also, this is Monday and we have mail, so this is also a mail haul. And also, this is Monday, so we're going to do a Monday Reads. All at once. So, let's begin, shall we? Our first book, something we've seen on this channel before. This is Simon Jenkins. This is a short history of Europe, from Pericles to Putin. Which is, it fills out the bill. It is, let's see what we've got here. It's 350 pages soaking wet. That's 300 pages if you take out all the introductory material and the index and the footnotes and whatnot. And of course, that's absurd. You can't write a history of Europe from Pericles to Putin in this short a book. So you have to hope for other things going on here, because the bulk of the thing portended in the title isn't going to be much more, can't be much more than the Encyclopedia Britannica entry on the history of Britain, or history of Europe. You have to hope for more than that. I have the advanced copy of this. I haven't got to it. I am hoping for more than that. This author has often pleased me. So we're going to see. Let's see what we get for an opening paragraph. Maybe it is something that would... oh, wow. Look at that. This thing. It starts off with page after page of maps for all the different eras of Europe. Wow. Very nice. Europe at the end of World War I, the start of World War II. Fantastic. Okay. All right. So great... great visuals. Now let's start with the opening chapter. This will be our the popcorn section of our reading. The cliffs of Cape St. Vincent stand high and wild on the Portuguese coast, forming the southwest tip of Europe. Here we can watch the sun sink at dusk into the Atlantic, where the earliest Europeans believed they had reached the end of the world. Each night they thought they were seeing their source of heat and light extinguished by the ocean, to be reborn the following morning. I know of nowhere more conducive to such myths. Beyond these barren cliffs, the viewer sees nothing but an eternity of sea. Behind is a landmass over which have rolled waves of tempestuous history. Okay, so a pretty evocative start. So let's move on to page 112 and see what we get when Simon Jenkins is mowing along. So where are we here? Let's see here. We are talking about... Oh, God. We're talking about Henry VIII. And I open to page 112, and who's the first name I see? Erasmus. Oh, my. Catherine remained in England. That's Catherine of Aragon. Remained in England and went on to marry Arthur's younger brother, Henry, who had, in 1509, taken the throne as Henry VIII. The marriage was initially happy, and Catherine was a popular and lively consort, friend of Erasmus and Thomas More. Her crucial failing was not to bear Henry a son. Okay, she did. They just didn't live, as she said herself in her own defense. Her sister Joan's fate was no less vexed. Her father-in-law, Maximilian, was king of Austria and Germany and the Holy Roman Empire from 1493. He was notional ruler of much of Italy, and by marrying Mary of Burgundy, ruler also of Burgundy and Flanders. To this estate he added his talent as matrimonial diplomat. One daughter was betrothed at age of 3 to the Dauphin of France. Others were married to rulers of Bohemia and Hungary. The marriage of his Italian niece to Sigismund I of Poland expedited a Polish Renaissance. No heiress in Europe was said to be safe from a Habsburg ring. Let others wage war, it was said of Maximilian, but thou, O happy Austria, marry. For those kingdoms which Mars gives to other, Venus gives to thee. Okay, all right. So, pretty much what we'd expect. Fast, very sketchy. But you see the same thing that we saw in the opening paragraph, which is that's pretty vibrant reading. That is the author going for at least the very good quote of all the familiar quotes that are at his disposal. So, in terms of those two tags, this is promising. And it is Monday Reads. I will be doing it today and tonight. So we'll move on. Move on to the next one. You may have seen this in the news. This is by Roger McNamee. It is Zucked. Waking up to the Facebook catastrophe. Roger McNamee is a Silicon Valley insider. He's been a Silicon Valley investor for decades. Knows everybody, knows where all the bodies are buried. And this is being touted as, by the few critics who've got their hands on it, the few critics who've actually written it up so far, it's being touted as really, really good, despite the opportunistic and dumb title. So I'm eager to read it. I left active participation in Facebook years ago, largely because the people that I was friends with on Facebook were serially boring me. I didn't actually leave because of the nightmare of what Facebook later became revealed to be. I would have. If I'd stuck around then, that would have done it. But I left providentially before that for personal reasons. And now I don't go back hardly ever. And it's kind of demoralizing to see a lot of the same stuff going on when I do go back. But since then, the Facebook has been, the scandal of Facebook has been in the news. And then there was that hilarious testimony that Zuckerberg gave in front of the U.S. Congress, where he really did seem. I mean, it was the instant meme all over social media, and some of the jokes that were done were hilarious. But it really did seem like he was a space alien. He had no idea what humans actually do or say. One of the memes was that he had to be reminded by an aide to blink occasionally because that's what humans do to protect their eyeballs. So I'm looking forward to reading this. Now let's see if I have cause to. We will go straight to the opening paragraph. November 9th, 2016. The Russians used Facebook to tip the election. That's in quotes. So began my side of a conversation the day after the presidential election. I was speaking with Dan Rose, the head of media partnership at Facebook. If Rose was taken aback by how furious I was, he hit it well. Let me back up. I am a longtime tech investor and evangelist. Tech has been my career and my passion, but by 2016 I was backing away from full-time professional investing and contemplating retirement. I had been an early advisor to Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, Zuck to many colleagues and friends, and an early investor in Facebook. I have been a true believer for a decade. Even at this writing, I still own shares in Facebook. In terms of my own narrow self-interest, I had no reason to bite Facebook's hand. It would never have occurred to me to be an anti-Facebook activist. I was more like Jimmy Stewart in Hitchcock's Rear Window. He is minding his own business, checking out the view from his living room when he sees what looks like a crime in progress, and then he has to ask himself what he should do. In my case, I had spent a career trying to draw smart conclusions from incomplete information, and one day early in 2016, I started to see things happening on Facebook that did not look right. I started pulling on that thread and uncovered a catastrophe. In the beginning, I assumed that Facebook was a victim, and I just wanted to warn my friends. But what I learned in the months that followed shocked and disappointed me. I learned that my trust in Facebook had been misplaced. Okay. Can't ask for better than that as an opening to the book. But let's see what's going on page 112. Has our author got tired? Has he started navel-gazing? Let's see. There is a popular misconception that regulation does not work with technology. The argument consists of a set of flawed premises. Number one, regulation cannot keep pace with rapidly evolving technology. Number two, government intervention always harms innovation. And number three, regulators can never understand tech well enough to provide oversight. And number four, the market will always allocate resources best. The source of these misconceptions is a very effective lobbying campaign led by Google with an assist from Facebook. Prior to 2008, the tech industry maintained an especially low profile in Washington. All of that changed when Google, led by Chairman Eric Schmidt, played a major role in Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, as did Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes. Obama's win led to a revolving door between Silicon Valley and the executive branch, with Google dominating the flow in both directions. The Obama administration embraced technology, and with it the optimism so deeply ingrained in Silicon Valley. Over the course of 8 years, the relationship between Silicon Valley and the federal government settled into a comfortable equilibrium. Tech companies supported politicians with campaign contributions on technology in exchange for being left alone. The enormous popularity of tech companies with voters made the hands-off policy a no-brainer for members of Congress. A few commentators expressed concern about the cozy relationship between tech and Washington, some out of concern about tech's outsized influence and market power, and others out of fear that the internet platforms might not be the neutral parties to democracy they claim to be. Okay, all right. So I see that some of the early praise of this book is entirely deserved. That is good, strong, clean prose. It's going to be a pleasure. No matter how dire the tidings, it's going to be a pleasure to be in that narrator's company for 250 pages. So that page, in terms of page 112 and in terms of opening paragraph, that's a success. I'm now eager to read this book, which is good, because remember, it's part of Monday Reads. Try and keep all these parts moving, okay? So next, we have a murder mystery. This is by Lucy Foley, and it is called The Hunting Party. Everyone's invited. Everyone's a suspect. And look at that cover. That is a country house, but bound in snow. And we are on the title is on the steps, the snowbound, blurred steps. It's the house is in the background. It's sort of the punchline. And this is the story of a group of friends who were tightly knit at Oxford, and years have passed, and they decided to have a reunion in the Scottish Highlands in a secluded hunting lodge. And of course, tragedy strikes because there are all sorts of tensions boiling underneath the surface, and we don't know. It's just Lucy Foley just writes the standard country house murder mystery, only with all the modern appurtenances. So let's see how this does for the opening paragraph, or the opening bit. If a lot of 21st century books start with a word or an emoji, so I'll read a bit to give you a sense of the beginning. Now, January 2nd, 2019. I see a man coming through the falling snow. From a distance, through the curtain of white, he looks hardly human, like a shadow figure. As he nears me, I see it is Doug, the gamekeeper. He is hurrying through to the lodge, I realize, trying to run, but the falling snow hampers him. He stumbles with each step. Something bad. I know this without being able to see his face. As he comes closer, I see that his features are frozen with shock. I know this look. I have seen it before. This is the expression of someone who has witnessed something horrific, beyond the bounds of normal human experience. I open the door of the lodge, let him in. He brings with him a rush of freezing air, a spill of snow. What's happened? I ask him. There is a moment, a long pause, in which he tries to catch his breath, but his eyes tell the story before he can, a mute communication of horror. Finally he speaks. I found the missing guest. Well, that's great, I say. Where? He shakes his head, and I feel the question expire on my lips. I found a body. Okay. All right. It's not exactly Chekhov. But in terms of literary quality, it's not exactly Chekhov. Yeah, there are a couple of gaffes there that I'm sure you noticed. But gripping, all the same, lean and gripping. If there were gaffes at all on the first page, then page 112 might not bode well. But let's move on and see what the author does. We're embroiled here. If I sense that I'm going to be giving key things away, then I'll stop. Miranda gestures to us all to join her. She grabs Mark's hand, pulls him to his feet. At first he looks lumpish and awkward in the middle of the carpet, but as she fits her body to his, they begin to move together, and with her he acquires a rhythm, sinuous, even sensual, that he would never find on his own. It seems to be infectious, the thrum of the music exerting a pull over everyone. Samira gets up. She's always been a fantastic dancer. She has that looseness, that sense of ease in her own skin. Giles grabs Emma's hand, pulls her to her feet, and dances her around the room. Giles has no rhythm at all, but he clearly doesn't care. He's like an overgrown, drunken schoolboy. They cannon into one of the deer heads on the wall, knocking it askew. Emma tries to right it with an anxious grin, but as she does, Giles seizes her around the waist and turns her upside down. "Giles!" Samira shouts, but she's laughing, and she turns away from them with her eyes closed, lost to the music. Emma's laughing too, though she's perhaps the only self-conscious one of them all, tugging her top down as Giles sets her back on her feet. Now Nick's standing too, putting his hand out for Beau, and they're arguably even better dancers than Miranda. They move so well together. As ever, though, it is Miranda the eye is drawn back to, the sun around which all the other are orbiting planets. Mark is in his element, leaning into the grooves of her body as they dance. Never has his crush on her been more blatant. If you can call it a crush. Sometimes I have wondered if it might be something more. When Miranda and Julian started going out, I remember thinking it was a bit odd that his mate seemed to be acting as a kind of courier between them, ferrying messages back and forth. Mark would arrive at our college asking to speak with her. He had something to tell her from Julian. Julian, like a king sending out an envoy, wanted to invite her to his rugby game that weekend, or to accompany him to some party. It was pathetic, I thought. Okay, all right. That's a well-conveyed scene of old friends dancing, and it's a well-modulated shift into the narrator remembering something, shifting, the association from what the narrator is seeing in terms of these people dancing to, a glimpse of the past. It's well done, so it's nice and smooth. I didn't trip over anything, and I like that. I like that very much. So this will probably be a fairly accomplished, smooth read. Although one of the funny things about that page 112 is, my God, could the names be any more English? Even if you knew nothing about this book, you would know a lot about the characters involved. It was like a roll call of British booktubers. All right, so that was also fairly successful. So now we'll move on to something completely different. This is nonfiction. This is John Baxter, A Year in Paris. It's a lovely deckled edge, French flaps, paperback original of the travel writer. This is a travel writer who spent a year in Paris and wrote about it. This has lovely black and white photos all throughout. A wonderful keepsake book if you like Paris, if you're particularly enamored of Paris. I am not. And I know that puts me in a rarity among people who have traveled, especially people who have visited there often. I've been to Paris several times, and it failed every time to cast its legendary spell. But let's see. This author clearly is under that spell. So let's see how we start off here, because this is right around the corner. This is going to be in your bookstores. What have we got here? Yeah, this is at the end of February, so this is going to be on the paperback release table in your U.S. bookstores. So let's see here. Here's how it starts. Sometimes it simply happens. You just know. So I can remember the day when I first learned of the love affair between Paris and the seasons. Paris and the seasons. The relationship between Paris and the seasons is exactly the same as the relationship between New York City and the seasons. Incredibly picturesque when you're not there. When you are there, the summers are unbearable, like living on a broiler plate, and the winters have all the bad parts of cold, drafts, chill, and slush, and none of the good parts. Love affair between Paris and the seasons. Oh my. Sacre bleu. Charles de Gaulle. Champs-Élysées. I was, I suppose, in a state of hypersensitivity. You certainly were, buckaroo. Attuned to the subtlest of signals. Just a year before, I had been happily settled in Los Angeles, living at last in the city I'd selected as my spiritual home after reading the novels of Raymond Chandler in adolescence and seeing the films of Billy Wilder. This guy has a masochistic relationship with everywhere he lives. Those two things would make you not want to live in L.A., not want to live there. The years in Europe and my native Australia were like old snapshots, colors faded by the California sun. That past and those people no longer existed. I woke each morning to a perpetual present in the city acknowledged as the capital of now. Okay. Well, that's certainly passionate. I don't agree with any of it, but I don't need to. Let's move on to page 112 and see what further ecstasies the author indulges in. Then there were the leaves. Oh, so we must be in autumn by now. Overnight, the gardeners had corralled the fallen chestnut, plane, and sycamore leaves in the millions and heaped them in chicken wire cages, each large enough to contain an automobile. Those that escaped made a carpet ankle-deep under the trees, or blew into the Rue de Medici to clog the gutters and plaster themselves to the sidewalks in a collage of beiges and browns. London had just as many deciduous trees as Paris, but I didn't remember seeing leaves in such abundance along the Mall or in Regent's Park. Did their staffs do a better job of raking? I doubted it. Rather, those who maintained the Luxembourg chose to let leaves accumulate. Far from being a problem, they were part of the show. Okay, well, that's very companionable. I have a feeling that this book is going to be an absolute bullseye for readers who love Paris. I think that's probably going to be a prerequisite, not that this is going to be one of those books that makes you love Paris, or that does its best to, but rather that you're going to have to go in loving Paris. Fortunately for the author and for the endeavor of writing this book, most people do feel that way about the city of now, the capital of now. So this will probably be, those are certainly very effective, nothing to sneer at, and not no trace of the vapid stupidity that usually goes hand in hand with travel writing. So still a positive experience, just not anything aligning with my own life. Then we have an upcoming book. This is a mystery novel, comes out in May. It's by Ellie Griffiths, who I did not know a lot about. I have been catching up on her, and I've been very much liking what I've been reading. And she is the author of a series about a forensic investigator called Ruth Galloway. And I admit, she has another series as well, The Magic Man. But I have been reading the Ruth Galloway books, and they are every bit as entertaining as advertised. And this book comes out in May. It'll be her new book, and it's called The Stone Circle. Look at that cover. Oh, my. And in it, there are echoes of the crimes that took place and the murderer that was eventually caught in the very first Ruth Galloway novel. The author was alerted to archaeological finds that were new in the area that was the archaeological basis for the first book in the series, and decided that deserves another book, as you do if you're a prolific author. So this is the 11th book in that series, but it's really a kind of a full circle feeling, and I'm looking forward to it. Greatly looking forward to it. So let's see how we start off. Let's see if these two samples will convince those of you who don't know this author of the good stuff that I've been encountering. It starts off with a date, the 12th of February, 2016. Lots of lamentation in America on that day, but this book will probably be mercifully free of such things. DCI Nelson. Well, here we are again. Truly, our end is our beginning. That corpse you buried in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year? You must have wondered whether I, too, was buried deep in the earth. Oh, man of little faith, you must have known that I would rise again. You have grown older, Harry. There's gray in your hair, and you have known sadness. Joy, too, but that also can bring anguish. The dark nights of the soul. You could not save Lucy, but you could save the innocent who lies within the stone circle. Believe me, Harry, I want to help. The year is turning. The shoots rise from the grass. Imbolc, and here we dance under the stars. I go to the stone circle in peace. It's a letter sent to Detective Chief Inspector Harry Nelson. Pushes the letter away from him and lets out something that sounds like a groan. He's back. And that's how it begins. A taunting letter from a figure that Nelson and Galloway are sure were dead. Sure has been dead for years. And then we'll move on to page 112. That's a wonderful, bringing us right to the letter and the controversy that's going to ensue from it is a wise choice, directly into the action. Now let's see, page 112. Almost against his will, he remembers something Eric once told him. It's the landscape itself that's important. And Nelson does see that there is something special about this place, even though in his mind it's special in a way that accidental hotspots are special. "Would you like a tour?" says Leaf, with a hand waving towards the diggers and trenches. "No, you're all right," says Nelson. "I wanted to talk to you because some letters have been received." "Letters?" Leaf tilts his head. He's taller than Nelson, which is annoying. "Letters that recall other letters," says Nelson. "The ones your father wrote." "My father wrote you letters?" Leaf sounds interested, even slightly amused, but Nelson doesn't entirely buy the act. He thinks that Leaf is also wary. His arms are crossed, which Judy said would be a sign of defensiveness. "Your father once wrote me a series of letters," says Nelson, "which significantly impeded a major crime investigation. He would have been charged with wasting police time if he hadn't, died." Leaf glances over his shoulder at the marshland, bright with spring flowers. So he does know where his father died. "I didn't know," he says. "We weren't always that close, my father and me. He was a free spirit." A phrase that, in Nelson's opinion, hides a multitude of sins. Okay, I think we've spotted our killer, or certainly our red herring. Okay, great. So you see right there in that interaction between the two of them that there's dialogue, but there's also a lot going on other than dialogue. That's good, and I've noticed that in Griffith's books, that while she's updating the story and having the characters talk to each other and to themselves, she's also keeping a running commentary in Nelson's mind, and Nelson misses very little. And that's always fun. When you have a police character who's like that, that's always fun. So that's encouraging. I'm going to be reading it soon anyway. And then our next book is also Ellie Griffiths. This is not a Ruth Galloway novel, and this is not a Magic Men novel. This is a standalone novel that I think we saw on this channel before. This is The Stranger Diaries. Her attempt at a modern-day Gothic about a woman who keeps a diary, and I think you might remember me describing this. She keeps a diary, and when something happens, she goes to her diary to write all about it, and there is a line in her diary by another hand, and she's not sure who it is. There are a small list of subjects. So let's see how it starts off. "If you'll permit me," said the stranger with a capital S, "I'd like to tell you a story. After all, it's a long journey, and by the look of those skies, we're not going to be leaving this carriage for some time. So why not pass the hours with some storytelling? The perfect thing for a late October evening." Okay, so we start off with someone telling a story, and we don't know who it is, because they aren't given a proper name. And now let's move on. The stranger, though, is key to the book, because the mayhem that is taking place is patterned after a Victorian story called The Stranger, which is a favorite of the main character. So that we know, if you know anything, if you're the type of reader who reads The Dust Jacket, then you will know that the book is probably opening with an excerpt from that story. But it's still an invitation to storytelling, which is kind of neat that it plays those two roles. Then we move to page 112. "The caretaker, I suppose. He's got duplicate keys to everything." "Is that still Pervy Pat?" I said, without thinking. "Mr. Patterson left about 10 years ago, I think. Before my time," she added. "How did you know about him?" "I used to go to Tarlegarth High," I said. She would probably find out sooner or later. "I'm an old girl, feeling older by the second." "Does Tony know?" she said. "Be careful, or he'll be talking to you about year 10 on careers day." "I haven't told him," I said. I didn't, strictly speaking, dislike the idea of talking to the students. "Why, who do you think could have put the dummy there?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "I've been thinking and thinking about it." "Is there anyone with a grudge against you?" "Not that I know of." "What about Rick Lewis?" She sat up very straight and looked at me like I was a year 7 who had asked what her first name was. "Why do you ask that?" Okay. Well, I think I mentioned when I got the advanced copy of this that I've never been a big fan of Gothic fiction. But I am now a fan of this author, so I'm willing to follow where she leads. I haven't read my advanced copy. And then the last book that we have here, but one, our penultimate book, is nonfiction. It's Ian Kershaw. It's The First Wave. This is an in-depth, granular study of the first wave of men who took the beaches on D-Day for the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landing. And this is Alex Kershaw is writing 2 books this year, and this is one of them. And this comes out in May with a color photo. Look at that, headed towards the beach, knowing perfectly well that they were facing just a fortress that was prepared and ready to repulse invaders. So this is going to be a minute by minute, person by person, diary by diary account of the D-Day landings. So it starts off with June 5th, 1944. The clock in the war room at Southwick House showed 4 a.m. The 9 men gathered in the 25 by 50-foot former library, its walls lined with empty bookshelves, were anxiously sipping cups of coffee, their minds dwelling on the Allies' most important decision of World War II. Outside in the darkness, a gale was blowing, angry rain lashing against the windows. The weather was terrible, recalled 53-year-old Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower. Southwick House was shaking. Oh, it was really storming. Given the atrocious conditions, would Eisenhower give the final go-ahead or postpone? He had left it until now, the very last possible moment, to decide whether or not to launch the greatest invasion in history. Okay, so that's how it starts off. Those of you who know Ian Kershaw will recognize that style. That's the way he tends to write. Very personal, very quote-oriented, very you-are-there, ground-level history. Very entertaining stuff. So now we'll move to page 112. Let's see here. There were bound to be heavy casualties as Otway's men charged, some armed with explosives, toward the casemates, while others engaged 130 defenders manning a large blockhouse, 15 machine gun nests, and an anti-aircraft gun position. Do not be daunted if chaos reigns. It undoubtedly will. Those had been the parting words before leaving England of Otway's commanding officer. How true had been his prediction. Everything that could have gone wrong had done so. The commander of A Company, Major Alan Parry, approached Otway. "Have you decided what to do, sir?" whispered Parry. "Do?" snapped Otway. "Attack in 3 minutes, of course. Pass it on." See, so you get, in Kershaw's books, especially a book like this, you'll get lots and lots of quotations to break up the historical narrative, because he has talked to every survivor in great depth, become friends with a lot of them. So because he's become friends with a lot of them and talked to a lot of them about the same events, he's able to do a wonderful job of sifting through instead of taking anybody explicitly at their word. So this is bound to be really good. I'm a big fan of this author anyway. And those certainly work out. And then the last thing that we will do for this page 112, BookTube Parasite, popcorn opening paragraph, Monday Reads, Am Reading, Mail Haul, is a single package. There was one thing that came this morning it came alone, so I thought we'd just do that. So what do we got here? Okay, all right. This is a novel, big thick thing, comes out in April. It is by Isabella Hamad, and it is The Parisian. Let's see here. Tipped by The Guardian as a novel of immense size and confidence, a hugely accomplished historical sweep of a book, Plimpton Prize winner Isabella Hamad's extraordinary debut, this is a debut novel, wow, tells the story of one man's journey from Palestine under crumbling Ottoman rule to the salons of World War I-era Paris and back again, to his home in Nablus, where the seeds of the Palestinian independence movement have begun to take root. Wow, so this is going to be another ambitious historical novel and a debut. Fantastic. Okay, so this comes out in early April. So let's see. This is exactly the kind of thing that the page 112 tag was made for. Let's see how we start. There was one other Arab on board the ship to Marseille. His name was Farouk al-Azman. And the day after leaving port in Alexandria, he approached Midhat at breakfast, with a plate of toast in one hand and a string of amber prayer beads in the other. He sat, tugged at the cuffs of his shirt, and started to describe without any introduction how he was returning from Damascus to resume his teaching post in the language department at the Sorbonne. He had left Paris at the outbreak of war, but after the miracle of the Marne was determined to return. He had gray eyes and a slightly rectangular head. Okay, all right. We're told in that opening paragraph that the incident that is being described is every bit as abrupt and free of preamble to the main character, Midhat, as it is to us. Okay, so that's a canny narrative approach. That often works, because then you're immediately allied with the main character. So let's go to page 112. and see how things are doing by then. This is a huge book. This is almost 600 pages long. Sylvain Leclerc lived on his vineyard in the left bank of the Hérault and spent his days between the trellises or in his vaults monitoring the barrels. At the same time, he was a figure about town, a feature at most major gatherings and many minor ones, in a way that had little to do with his profession. Possibly it had to do with his connection to Paris. His maiden aunts lived in the 5th arrondissement, and he visited them several times a month, and was apparently popular at salons in the neighborhood. But Sylvain never masqueraded as a cosmopolite, nor falsified his southern vowel sounds or the nasal accents that rounded off most end-stopped words with the inconclusive syllable On the contrary, Sylvain Leclerc was unashamedly parochial and always disgruntled, aggressive, self-righteous, and somehow this was his ticket to all classes and parties in which he was famed and praised for his bad temper. Okay, all right, so that is unusual. That feels old-fashioned, doesn't it? It feels like something like we would read in our Trollope read-along. That kind of a character description and that kind of authorial, almost contempt for the character. I have a bit of a logistic problem with the paragraph that we just heard, because it starts off with the narrator telling us that this character spends his days in his trellises, in his vineyards, or in his wine cellars, and spends the rest of the paragraph telling us that he spends an enormous amount of time elsewhere. So he doesn't spend his days doing that. The paragraph is at odds with itself, and of course we don't know enough about the book to know whether or not that's intentional, whether or not maybe to know that maybe the narrator does that sort of thing, and we're not supposed to take them completely at their word. I don't know. I'll have to find out. So this is an ambitious thing. Isabel Hamad was born in London. She won the Plimpton Prize for Fiction with her story Mr. Canaan. Her writing has appeared in conjunctions on the Paris Review, and this is her first novel. Fantastic. Okay. So, in terms of first exposures of these books, this was a fairly successful mishmash of the tag, wasn't it? So we'll do. It was so hideously long, I'm noticing. Well, what do you expect with all that prose? So we'll do a pyramid here. We have The Parisian, a debut historical novel. We have The First Wave, about the men who took the beaches at Normandy. We have The Stranger Diaries by Ellie Griffiths, which is a standalone Gothic novel by the author of this series. And we also have this series, A Stone Circle, which calls back the events and the perpetrator of the first book in the series. Then we have A Year in Paris by John Baxter, about all the different seasons of the capital of now. And then The Hunting Party, a whodunit set in a snowbound hunting chalet. Old friends, one of whom is evil and the others don't know it. Then Zucked, by Roger McNamee. I'll be reading this right away on all of the controversy surrounding Facebook, and you know that the story's going to get worse than even this book reports. And finally, A Short History of Europe by Simon Jenkins, which I will be reading all of these things in short order. This is my Monday reads for you, in addition to all these other things. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. That's quite long enough, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.